Hi, my name is Scott Sectanosat. I'm excited to be speaking with you today on how dbt works together with Dremio. I am the Alliances Solutions Architect for Dremio, and with me today is Anders Swanson, who's on the Senior Partnership Engineering team at dbt Labs. The agenda for today is we're going to answer some of these questions you see here. What is Dremio? What is the Open Data Lakehouse? And how does dbt and Dremio come together? If you look at the terms, the data lake, the data warehouse, you've all heard it before. So what does Dremio do exactly, right? Well, our mission is Dremio enables high performance analytics directly on the data lake, eliminating the need to move or copy data into a data warehouse. You guys are probably wondering, why do we want to eliminate moving or copying data into a data warehouse? You'll find out here in a second. As we begin, let's talk about Dremio as a company. You see the companies here listed on the right side here range from banking to storage to automotive, anything you see here. Why do they use Dremio, right? So, I mean, they're using Dremio because Dremio is an open self-service analytics that supports SQL, and we just perform really well, right? Delivering BI at 1/10 the cost of data warehouses. We support the open source community. We're creators and hosts of the Subsurface Live conference, and as you can see, fun fact is we are in production in 5 of the Fortune 10. So what is Dremio as an open data lakehouse? So typically in the past, the client tools such as data science tools, dashboarding tools, and apps usually would run directly on the data warehouse. Where Dremio comes in is if we eliminate the data warehouse, we're not copying data into the data warehouse anymore. So Dremio is able to access the data layer directly through its supported protocols. The queries that actually get run on that get submitted through the dashboarding tools, the data science tools, and the apps are now sent through the Dremio's query engine to access into the data directly. So the data layer you see here supports a few different data lakes, and not only the ones that are listed here, but we have a few that we support outside of this. But S3 and ADLS are some of the popular ones. And you still have access to the same data coming from the same data sources, but now you don't have expensive copies that are sitting on data warehouses. So if you think about analytics teams today, right? A lot of data analysts operate in isolation. So sometimes they're not sharing knowledge. The knowledge becomes siloed. They rewrite scripts that have already been written by their colleagues. It just amounts to reduced decision speeds, reduced decision qualities, and sometimes when these analysts have requests that are more complex, they send these requests over to the engineers, right? So sometimes the engineers can become the bottleneck. And what you get is recycled deliverables, you get repeated work, there's no version control. It's just very complex when you have everyone using different tools in different languages. But think about this workflow problem from a different perspective, right? There's the term analytics as code, right? So if the engineering teams in software engineering companies, right, have already come up with the methods to collaborate. So they've already come up with the ways to handle collaboration, code sharing, version control, testing, things like that. So how come we can't apply it to analytics? Well, we can. And this is where dbt comes in, right? So dbt provides a framework that now you have access to version control, data lineage, testing, DevOps, all the things that software engineering teams can do. Now we can do with analytics. And now all the data engineering teams, all the data science teams are now able to collaborate with their data analytics counterparts. And bringing dbt and Dremio together really enhances the way SQL can now be used as code, right? So SQL can now be used as a way to run analytics as code and simplifies that architecture. And typically, the entry point for your data stack are in the client tools, and BI tools are a good example of that. And usually, this entry point is limited in terms of how many contributors you can have to your data stack. It's only the data analysts that have access to that. But now you have data engineers, you have data scientists that are now sharing a SQL first integration to build these production data pipelines. And further enabling the open data lakehouse, right? You're now able to transform your data into supported table formats like Iceberg or Delta Lake and still be able to keep your data lake, right? Just improving the performance on it. All in all, that could reduce complexity in your infrastructure and also reduces cost at the same time. So how does introducing, we have our dbt-dremio adapter, right? This is our validated adapter on version 1.3.0 of dbt core. And the problem we're trying to solve is typically in deploying, testing, organizing data models in the data lake has traditionally been challenging, usually requires complex workflows. And the joint solution between dbt and Dremio with our dbt-dremio adapter now enables you to connect to Dremio directly and be able to run data models on dbt using Iceberg or Delta Lake, all within the same open data lakehouse. And now all the data analysts can trust their data science and data engineering team counterparts, right? There's no need for a separate data warehouse or unnecessary copies of data. The outcome we get from this is this Dremio adapter now supports data transformation in our open data lakehouse. Without further ado, let's demo Dremio. All right, so here we are in our dbt Dremio environment. So before we get started, let's show you the Dremio UI. When you log into the Dremio UI, you're shown what you have for your data sets, your home space, which is part of our semantic layer, right? You can share data sets with other folks on your team. You can search for certain data sets here that are shared with you. And we also support different data sources, including object storage, databases, etc. So if you look here, you also have a SQL runner that you can run as well. And you can actually see jobs that are running on your Dremio server as well. So if you want to add a data source, you can click on the plus sign here and you can see all the data sources that Dremio supports. And it's a lot of the popular databases and data sources out there. And yeah, so without further ado, let's go ahead and let's add in a new dbt project. And let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to launch a command window here. And I'm going to go to the directory that I want to add the new project. So I'm just going to put it in the documents directory. And we can run a dbt init. And what this will do is it will set up the connection to Dremio. And enter the name of the project. I'm just going to do dbt-dremio project here. And we're going to use the Dremio adapter that's already installed. Use option number 2 for username and password. Enter the IP address of Dremio. The default port of 9047 will work fine. The username, you enter your username. And then accept all the other defaults. All right. So what that did was it will create a project folder under the documents, right? So if you go to your documents folder now, you'll see that you have this dbt-dremio underscore p that we gave it a name to, and basically provides the framework for dbt to, so now you have access to creating macros, models, tests that are supported by dbt core. And we're going to be opening that up with Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to go here and we're just going to open up Visual Studio Code. And we're going to open folder. We're going to close the old folder first that I had open previously, and we're going to do an open folder. We're going to navigate to the documents directory, and we're going to select the folder that we created. So now here on the left, you'll have access to all the files and the models. dbt provides 2 sample models that you can run, but we're gonna create a model, a simple model that we can run on the Dremio dataset. So if you go back to Dremio here, there's a dataset that's already loaded on here called New York Taxi Rides, Taxi Trips. And the one that we have here is Taxi Trips Iceberg, which is an iceberg table that, here we go here. And it has a few columns, pickup date, fare amount. And what we're going to do is we're going to access this table through dbt. So if we go back to its dbt code, but before we do that, let's go here. Well, let's do this, yeah. So let's do a new file. And let's call it dbt model.sql, dbt-dremio model.sql. All right. So once that's created, actually is the I'm going to use the SQL query that selects 3 columns from the New York Taxi Rides table. And then we're going to do the name of the table. It was samples trip iceberg. Okay. All right. I'm just going to save this. All right. So we can go back to our command line here. And if we scroll, if we go into project directory and we run dbt debug, this will actually debug our connection. So just to make sure we have the connection to Dremio and all the connections look okay. So now to run the models and have dbt create the table in Dremio, we can do a dbt run. What it should do is it should, it shows that it's running 3 models now. All right, it completed successfully. So now we can go back into the web browser, into Dremio, and as you can see, it created 3 new tables. We generated the example tables as well, but if you click into this one right here and run to see the contents of it, you see that it came up with the 3 columns and limit 5 that we had suggested. I mean, this is a very simple example, but as you can see, this opens up a lot of opportunities to run code. You can go in here and you can run anything from the Jinja SQL. You can create your Python scripts here and run them through here. Possibilities are endless here, right? So that allows data analysts to now have access to all the code that the data engineering teams do. So, yeah, well, hopefully I pass this on to Anders to kind of explain the dbt benefits here. I don't want to steal his thunder here, but I'm sure you'll find a lot of dbt, the framework for testing and for using dev and prod environments and running the same test suites on those environments using the same logic. Very, very useful. So with that, I pass it over to Anders.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anders. I work at dbt Labs as a partner engineer, and I wanted to work with Scott here today to kind of show y'all what the power of dbt is and how together with Dremio can be a really great solution for you. So first off, there's a big distinction that's worth making is that there's a difference between dbt and dbt Labs. dbt is our open source product, of which we have over 10,000 customers using it in production, teams using it in production, and 50,000 members in our dbt community Slack. Then, of course, we have dbt Labs, which formerly was Fishtown Analytics, which is the software company built around the open source tool to help make data practitioners' lives more easy. So to talk about dbt, we actually have to get into how things were done in the old world of data warehousing. It's also worth noting that a data warehouse isn't something that you can just buy. Rather, you have to build and maintain. But in the legacy ETL world, we have 3 phases, which is extract, transform, and load. And then downstream of that, we'd have BI tools. So in this old paradigm in which compute and storage were both expensive, most of the transformation was done in memory before it being inserted into the database. So on daily procedures triggered by stored procedures, we'll get data that's manipulated, and then it lands already cleaned in the data warehouse, ready for BI tools to use. So this can work quite well for that paradigm, given that one, there wasn't that much data, the speed of data wasn't as important. But now in a world, I'll get into what our world looks like today, but given that there was high storage and compute costs and that you could have many things happening inside of these transforms that are dependent and none of it was in source control, things could get really tricky really quickly. So now we have this sort of modern ELT, which is extract, load, transform. And we say, in this case, instead of transforming on the fly, let's load the data as raw as possible into the warehouse and then transform it, and then have those transforms as legible and as tested and as maintainable as possible. And that's where the dbt CLI comes in. So this paradigm works best in a cloud model, but there's lots of customers and users of dbt who use in on-prem scenarios. The idea is to use SQL first, because instead of having to write .NET transforms and Python and SQL and Spark have all these different things happening, like let's just standardize on SQL. And where possible, when we can use elastic storage and compute, that's going to save us a lot of money. So again, transformation hasn't really evolved much in the data industry when we compare it to 20 years ago, right? So like in this traditional ETL provider, like what you can kind of do is, you'll see this a lot in public cloud services, are sort of this bundled all-in-one low-code environment where you can sort of like drag and drop your sources to make things happen. The pros of that is that it's like all-in-one, it's bundled. The custom code and schedulers, like in this case, you could do whatever you want. Like you can write your own frameworks, and that used to be the way that many organizations did their data warehousing, is they had custom connectors, libraries, frameworks that were all just in-house and not used anywhere else. But the benefit of that is that you could do whatever you wanted with it, as long as you could code it. But the cons to both of these is that what it ends up doing is, one, it builds silos. Either you're using a product that doesn't require dev resources, and then devs don't like to use it, or you're using these custom frameworks that end up ballooning in terms of tech debt and time to make changes. So what we get these siloed workflows where maybe like a marketing workflow was built by one marketing development team, finance has another one. Because they're disjointed, they become error prone, and it become costly because you have to rerun this and you're using all this compute at a locked-in pricing model. So our dbt viewpoint is really, listen, the work that data developers and data practitioners do is software. And as such, we should work like software engineers. So obviously we want to be able to introduce things like modularity testing, CI documentation. We also, let's just pick SQL to make it standard to use by everyone, in the same way that like HTML has been adopted as a web language. Let's use SQL because it's legible and it's cross-platform. Most data platforms will support SQL. So like I said earlier, we have 16,000 companies using dbt today. There's 3,000 dbt cloud customers, 12,000 trained analytics engineers, and we have 50,000 community members in our dbt Slack. So my favorite thing, the thing that really turned me onto dbt when I was like a champion and user at my previous role, was that it allows people to interact with data in the same place, as opposed to having to go to different places. Instead of like in a previous role, like, there's sort of like a dashboard of dashboards in the BI tool that's like a landing page to get people places. Data engineers know of where data is separately. Data analysts might maintain like scripts that create data outside of the warehouse. If everything's in the warehouse, we can work all together. So what this does is, if we walk through why each analyst, so data engineers, they love dbt because it makes things faster. It removes boilerplate. It also makes it easier to share transformation between job functions, like with data analysts, and data analysts like it for the same reason. We also get to test and version control before production, just like we would push a web app to dev and to test before pushing into production. These sort of CI workflows increase the quality of the software that we're writing, which is really transformations. And you get to, the idea is that you maximize as much as possible that lives inside of your directed acyclic graph inside the warehouse as SQL transformations. So then you are controlling as much as possible for like downstream errors due to some upstream one single line change to a SQL select statement. On the data consumer side, data analyst side, we get some auto updating lineage and documentation. We also have aspects like data freshness from source. We also have some really great features coming up in our roadmap with respect to like declarative scheduling, but I won't get into that too much now. So as far as how it works, dbt Core is our open source software product. It's everything that teams need, very technical teams need to transform data. It's a command line tool. You get to make your own ELT pipelines. It includes all the SQL compilation logic and the templating. It works for a large variety of adapters. I think over 30 different adapters work for dbt Core now. It includes testing frameworks for making sure that your data is correct, and it includes documentation. So this is the thing that we know that there's like, 15, 16,000 teams around the world who are using this today. And this is what customers of Dremio would be able to turn to first to be able to consolidate and make efficient their sort of data analytics engineering process. So what we get is like first in this, so in the dbt core paradigm, like we can talk about different pillars of the value prop of dbt core. The first is this idea of developing, like it allows folks to use either an IDE or a CLI. They get to use modular SQL, like we call them macros, ways to reuse certain logic like business time calculations or fiscal years, instead of having to have that copied and pasted in multiple places. That's it. And then there's also like some really nice quality of life packages like dbt utils that are made available and can be shared either within an organization or outside. So in the develop aspect, that's how dbt core provides value. So here's the select statements. Effectively in dbt core, an end user who's building an analytics pipeline, they don't have to do data manipulation statements, data definition statements. In this case, all we're asking is that you write select statements, just like select. And what's great about a select statement is most folks in a business should know this, or at least be able to legibly make educated guesses about what is happening. So in this case, what we see is you create a select statement, and then when you run dbt run, it kind of wraps it into some boilerplate code, like creating the table. But the user, you never have to think about this. So you can make views, tables, incremental in the same way. You also don't have to think about the run order. Like I think that's a thing that you can get into in dependency hell when you're running and triggering stored procedures, is which jobs have to run after which and how to make it all happen. When you consolidate everything into a directed acyclic graph and you use this reference sort of Jinja template, what it lets you do is automatically it understands the order in which your SQL files have to be executed, which is great. So then you can focus on the work that's most important, which is like defining your transformations as opposed to like how to get something running or what the hell is going on. So you can see in this example, like in the bottom, because this is templated in the top, it's very easy to be able to deploy to our dev schema versus our production schema. This is something that many companies were doing before even dbt, but this has like become the de facto way of deploying your warehouse to production. Another great aspect is documentation. Like there's lots of discussion within the data community around citizen data practitioners and folks who are not necessarily working with data every day, but need to engage with it. So we can talk about kind of how documenting becomes very helpful, or like the value prop of documentation for building a data warehouse. So we get things like, of course, that I'll get more into in further detail, but like dependency management, auto-updating the DAG, auto-updating your docs. So here's this great, because of that Jinja macro that we saw previously of like the ref statement, what we get is we get this nice lineage graph of how all of our tables, views, materializations are related to one another. And as you're building new transformations, you would get more nodes in this graph. And this is part of something that's create a static web app that's able to be deployed wherever you'd like to make available to like everyone in the business, whoever you'd like to know, if we want to know more data. You also get, for each of these nodes, you get to add your own documentation about like column names, table names, which tests are available, who's the owner of that table, who should they ask about more questions, and so on and so forth. Another large thing that the data industry never really had until very recently was this idea of tests and writing tests for how data should look. So we can get things like schema tests to make sure that things are empty or that these number of columns exist. We can get specific things to say like all these numbers should be positive. And then we get even more complicated tests when you look at some other packages built by other people. So if the goal, just as in software engineering, is we're trying to create software that is of a high quality and doesn't degrade and doesn't have tech debt, like testing is the way to make that happen. So here, what we allow for is that in just YAML, we allow an analytics engineer to be able to write a test for a given table to say, for example, the column order ID should be unique and it should not be null. And the column status, there should only be these 3 possible values. So what's so great about this is just using YAML, we're just defining a couple properties of a test. But what the magic of GPT core is, it'll take that information and use that to create a select statement to see how many times, how many rows break these rules for these tests. And this will work for any warehouse for which dbt is supported. And this is something that you would run before you promote to production to make sure that everything works. And you can fail and warn, and there's lots of configurability that's really easy that really hasn't been part of the workflow. Like oftentimes you'll go to organizations that have huge spreadsheets, and they'll kind of have like this sort of workflows, like run this query, how many results, 0, and you kind of like put a check marks in. It could be a very slow manual process. I've heard sometimes even a month to make an update to a data warehouse because of all these manual checks. So that's kind of, for me, a very high level of what dbt core provides. I know Scott has already provided a separate demo more specifically about what this looks like in the context of using Dremio Cloud with dbt core, which I'm excited to see, and you'll probably get something out of. But that's all I had to share from today. Again, I'm Anders from dbt Labs. If you have questions, you can reach out to me, of course, in this Q&A session, but also in the dbt community Slack. And I totally recommend checking out like some of our getting started courses and how to get dbt set up on Dremio. There's lots of great resources. And of course, if you'll ever have questions, feel free to reach out. We have a Dremio channel on the Slack as well, where Scott, myself, and many others are here and willing to help people out. Thanks.
Thank you, Anders and Scott, with that insightful presentation and demo. We'll open it up to everyone to ask their questions right now in the Q&A. Please submit your questions. Hello, everyone. I will ask the first question that has been submitted. First question to the team, to the panelists. And of course, let's go from Anders and to the panelists team from Dremio. I'm currently using the community connector. How do I get this new Dremio certified connector?
Yeah, I can answer that. So
okay.
One of the great starting points we had is an open source community connector created by Fabrice a little while ago, and he did an absolutely phenomenal job. And we've been working with him to take that connector and have it maintained by Dremio. So lots of people have been using that connector that was previously created by Fabrice. To move up to the Dremio maintained connector, we're at version, or adapter, we're at version 1.3.0. You can use a traditional pip install to get it. You can use Conda to also get it, and we'll also be providing some links to documentation to give this instructions.
Thank you, Jared. Next question is, how does Dremio improve on or extend documentation already existent in dbt?
So I can jump in there and answer that as well. So I think one of the answers I can give to this is one of the things that we've been working on our documentation is to map the dbt concepts to the Dremio concepts. You know, one of the great powers of using Dremio is it's a data lakehouse, so it provides a lot more additional functionality than your traditional data warehouse. A lot of data analysts and data scientists are very used to working with data warehouses, you know, with the traditional notion of database schemas, whereas Dremio gives, you know, a lot more functionality there. So the documentation we've been providing is to map some of those concepts that a lot of users of dbt are very familiar with to how Dremio thinks about them. How do you run your queries using dbt concepts to take full advantage of what Dremio offers? So that will be the documentation. It already exists, and we are augmenting it as we get feedback from the community to help make that transition to taking advantage of the power of Dremio easier.
Thank you, Jared.
I would say just adding on to that, like, I think,
yes, please, Anders.
how do I put this? I think a large power of documentation is like that the information is present where you are or where the developer is. So like we have like a standalone dbt docs site that you can launch and deploy and have separate authentication to that uses all of the possible column descriptions and tests and makes that available, shows you the lineage. But if you're a developer and you're using Dremio Cloud, it would be ideal to have that information in there. So like, I know that there's, for one, like the names of your tables and columns are present as defined in your dbt project, but also there's like an opportunity for us to look further into being able to like persist, column descriptions and table descriptions into sort of like the wiki feature. So I think there's lots of opportunities to improve it, but like already it's just having it be where the developer is in my opinion, a great improvement.
Thank you, Anders. We have a next question. Is there a plan to introduce UI to make development effort easier for non-technical folks?
It would just be, maybe I'm interested more in the idea of, or is like, which product does this relate to, Alex? Is this related to dbt or for Dremio? Okay, for dbt. So we have a cloud product UI today. It's a interactive development environment. That said, it's still very much like a code first tool. There's lots of scaffolding around to make that the workflows easier. There's like a nice GUI for Git, but that's still effectively, we're still today asking that analytics should be code. Although there are lots of folks who are dreaming about like a version of dbt that's point and click for less technical folks.
I'm going to ask the question from Alice again. How is code sharing, versioning, and promotion done? I'm assuming this is going to be on dbt as well.
Yeah, so I think this is, it's the standard DevOps. Like, I feel like a really fun way to compartmentalize all the innovation in the data industry is that we're just 10 years behind software engineering best practices. So if you're familiar with CI/CD at all, that like checking in a pull request and having that pull request be tested on a temporary Dremio cluster and then pushed to production, that's how code quality is ensured. So if that makes sense. I'm happy to throw some in the chat, like links to like what does that look like in production and deployment.
Perfect. Thank you, Anders.
These are all great questions, by the way. I'm very I wasn't sure what kinds of questions we're getting, but they're making me sweat a little bit reading them. So that means they're good questions.
Another question just came in from Alex Anders. He said, thank you. Can this be bundled up with Dremio code promotion?
I'm not sure exactly how to answer that because I feel as if the dbt project is your Dremio code, or maybe there's a concept of environments in Dremio with which I'm not familiar. That might be for someone else to answer, but my idea is ideally yes.
All right. Next question comes from John. Are there MDM or data governance tool or features built into Dremio?
So I can answer that one. So John, yes, there is. Right now, we've already released our first version of our row-based access control. That helps with data management as well as data governance and controlling who has access to which rows. We're doing another version of that as well. We're constantly working on it to make improvements. So that's one big feature. If there's other specifics that you had for me, please add it into the questions. Thanks.
Right. Next question submitted. Whether dbt-dremio model can connect to data sources, created in Dremio, or only to the physical data set created in Dremio?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can answer that. If I'm interpreting it correctly, then the answer is both. You can query against the data sources you had in Dremio. You can also query against the physical data sets in Dremio and taking full advantage of what Dremio has to offer there.
Also mentioned like all that dbt is a framework. It's like if you're writing Dremio queries in the Dremio UI, all that dbt is doing is sort of like taking those queries and bundling them into an envelope and sending them off to the cluster. So like anything that's possible for like, you know, object creation using the Dremio SQL API is also possible in dbt.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great point to add there. Thanks, Anders.
We have another question coming in. Wonder if DAGs are widely adopted and well understood. If yes, which job roles are considered to be the right people for managing their life cycles?
This is a juicy question, very juicy, right? Like, I don't think I can speak to how widely adopted directed acyclic graphs are. And just for really quick, I don't want to sound gatekeepy by not explaining acronyms. So like what a DAG is a directed acyclic graph. It's something that sounds complicated but isn't. Like D stands for directed. So you have nodes with lines connecting them. Acyclic means there's no circular references, like, you know, a table doesn't reference another table or references that same table, and graph, it means it's a picture, right? It's a network. So first, are they widely adopted and well understood? I can't say. I would like to believe that I would hope that they are. I would like them to be understood. I hope that they are well understood today, quote unquote, on average, if there was a survey of data practitioners. I think what I can speak to is the utility of DAGs. Effectively, I mean, I would like to believe that, you know, we're talking to like 60, 100 people. I don't know how many people are in this call, but I would like to believe if all of us have had experiences in data that have been all over the place and like wild goose chases, or like updating a spreadsheet and then emailing someone for an answer and getting that data and getting it back, like having data workflow and transformations be very disparate, you know, saving like analyses final dot version final with edits dot xlsx and emailing that back and forth is not a sustainable way. So it's like, I think one of the dbt comes as a reaction to sort of like these standard workflows that existed for analysts, and to say like, if we can connect and put all the data into one place, or at least be able to reference it from one place, and from there, like consolidate all of our transformations to be represented inside of a single directed acyclic graph, like that's what allows for a lot more efficiency. So we're not like copying, you know, Excel formula codes between notebooks, like everything's under version control and there's quality and testing against it. As far as like what are the right job roles to be the right person to manage this, like dbt promulgates this idea of a new job field called analytics engineer. And this would be like a role or team that sits between the data engineers and the data analysts. So if you're at a company where your BI team has grown to be more than like half a dozen people, some folks, you know, there's 100 enterprises with 100 data analysts in them, right? And then there's also a data engineering team. But as far as like how to provision and provide like high quality data sets to that like huge team of data analysts, that's where we say that's the analytics engineer. And that's like generally the purview of like thinking and working with DAGs and dbt. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Anders. Another question came in from Alex. Does dbt support complex data types such as array, map, struct, etc.? Can a nested Johnsons be flattened or expanded? JSON can be flattened or expanded.
Jared, you're happy to answer this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like anything that you can do with Dremio SQL, you can include in your select statements. All we're doing in dbt is saying, you just write select queries. We'll work on creating physical data sets, virtual data sets, tables, views. We'll do that for you. But all you have to do is write a select statement. So if you can write a select statement today in Dremio SQL that includes like flattening a JSON and using an array data type, you can do that in dbt.
Yeah, 100%, Andrews. 100%. Some things that we are working on, though, is some macro support. So as Anders said, there's a lot of great out-of-the-box macros provided by dbt. And part of the tasks of the team here at Dremio is to make sure those macros do work with Dremio in order to speed up development. So there are some macros that we are still evaluating and looking at to make sure that they are going to give you that power. If we find any issues, we are great at disclosing them on our GitHub under the issues section, especially around the macros. But as Anders said, any SQL that you can run in the Dremio UI, you can write.
Thank you. Next question that came in. Can dbt connect to Arctic Nessie?
I can take a stab at that one. So dbt, Arctic and Nessie are brand new kind of innovative kind of extensions of our product. And right now most BI tools, including dbt, should work off the main branch. We have made improvements and changes to our code on the Dremio side to make sure that it works with the main branch for Arctic. But with Arctic, you can create different point in time branches, and those different extended branches, we haven't tested, or we don't have them working with all the different BI tools. With dbt, we're still testing it to make sure it works with the main branch for Arctic. And just to note, Arctic is only available for our cloud right now. So Jared, maybe you could elaborate, will our current CLI work with the cloud, or do we need to be in dbt cloud in order to work with Dremio cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is the dbt Dremio adapter works both with Dremio software and Dremio cloud. So you can use the CLI to work with both. Some questions that might be prompted by that is, how do you authenticate using either again software or cloud? We support username and password for software. For cloud, we have a username and a personal access token for logging in. We also have, you can log in using a personal access token for software. Lots of great documentation on the Dremio site about what those concepts mean, how you can use them. And of course, we'll be linking to those concepts from our dbt-dremio documentation.
Another question came back in. Can you share the profile setup, Jared or Anders, regarding to that?
Maybe I can jump in there if I'm interpreting the question correctly. And please correct me if I'm not. So there's an interactive way to set up the profile when you do a dbt init project. And that will help walk you through what the most common variables, configurations that you need to provide in order to get connection working and in order to get you to run your models. The interactive process has defaults. So, I suggest to follow the defaults. If you don't know what to put in there, definitely follow the defaults. And that is enough to set up your profile to start using. Was I able to answer that question correctly?
I also threw a link in the chat to on our docs site, the Dremio setup about here's all the fields too, and how they might change.
Can I also just comment on Satya's latest question about I'm able to connect to Dremio, how to connect to Arctic? So we're still testing that out and working on that piece. So as we learn more, you can reach out to us and we can share our learnings, but we're still in the testing phase of that with dbt.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Last call for questions. Please do submit additional questions. We are in the 10-minute mark right now. All right, everyone. If there's no additional questions being asked, I will definitely give some time back to everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I want to make sure you have the contact of Scott and Anders. Thank you, team, for everything. And have a great rest of your day.